Lesson 20, graphing on a coordinate plane. So here on the picture you can see I have a coordinate plane. It's made up of two axes. You have that y-axis and the x-axis. And the center part is the origin. That's where 0, 0 is located. And we have the different parts of the quadrant. And so I'll look at those now. So a coordinate plane is just two perpendicular number lines. So as I said, you have the y-axis and you have the x-axis. The origin is where the two axes meet. So the origin would be right in the center here. And we have four quadrants. Quadrant 1, Quadrant 2, Quadrant 3, Quadrant 4. So it goes counterclockwise when you identify the quadrants. And just to let you know with the quadrants, Quadrant 1, all of your coordinates are positive. Quadrant 2, your x is negative, but your y's are positive. Quadrant 3, both of them are negative. And quadrant 4, x is positive, your y's are negative. And when you write your ordered pairs, your x coordinate always goes first, followed by your y coordinate. So let's take a look at some examples here. We want to graph each ordered pair on this coordinate plane. So we have 4 and 2. I always start at 0, 0. I always go right or left first. So 4 to the right, up 2. Put a point there. Negative 3 is 0. So I go to negative 3, 0. I don't go anywhere. It stays on the x-axis. 0, 5. I go all the way up to 5 on the y-axis. So that would be my y-intercept. We have negative 1 and negative 6. So I go to negative 1 and go down to negative 6, which would be here. That is briefly graphing these points on a coordinate plane. Example 2, dealing with variables. You have two variables. You have the independent variable, which is your input, and that's the variable whose value can be chosen. So those are your x values. You put something in. And the dependent variable, your output, variable whose value is determined by the value of the independent variable. That's your y. So you could choose your x's. Your y is all dependent on what your x you put in there. So the number of traffic violations and the cost of auto insurance. We want to identify which part is the independent, which one is the dependent. So what affects the other? So the number of traffic violations or the cost of auto insurance. So the independent would be the violations, because the cost is dependent on how many violations you get. So I'll put cost as your dependent. So you can put as many violations as you want, and you can determine about what your cost would be per month. Next one, electric bill total and kilowatts of electricity used. So the independent, what can you choose? Or what's going to affect the other? Well, the kilowatt usage that would be our independent variable, because that can change. And your bill is dependent on how much electricity you use. So the bill total would be your dependent. The amount paid and the number of toys purchased. So the independent, what are you putting into an equation? The number of toys purchased. And your bill, the amount you have to pay at the end of the cash register, is dependent on how many toys you did. So the amount paid would be the dependent. Example 3, determining the dependent variable. So here we're given the independent, the x variable, we need to find the y. So if I plug in a -2 in for x, so what is y when x is a -2? 4 times -2 is -8. -8 plus 2 is a -6. What if x is 0? So 4 times 0 plus 2, 4 times 0 is 0, plus 2 is 2. If x is 2, what is our y? 4 times 2 is 8, 8 plus 2 is 10. Then 3/4. If I put 3/4 in for x, and then add 2, 4 times 3/4 is 3. 3 plus 2 is 5. So we found our dependent variables in that table. Next one, if x is -3, so y equals 2 times -3 minus 1. 2 times -3 is -6. Minus 1 is a -7. Y equals 2 times a -2 minus 1. 2 times -2 is -4. -4 minus 1 is -5. And then if x is -1, so we have 2 times -1 minus 1. 2 times -1 is -2, minus 1 is -3. And then if x is 0, y equals 2 times 0 minus 1. 2 times 0 is 0, minus 1 is a -1. Now a word problem here. The federal minimum wage is about $5 per hour. The total on a minimum wage worker's paycheck is dependent on the number of hours worked. The paycheck total can be calculated using the equation y equals 5x. Find the pay for 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, and 8 hours. Make a graph to represent the equation y equals 5x. On the next slide, I have the table and the coordinate plane, so we'll go to that slide right now. We need to find the pay for 1 hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, and 8 hours. And our equation again is y equals 5x. So 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 times 5 is 25. And 5 times 8 is 40. So now that we have our table filled out, now we can create our graph here. You notice my number, I don't have numbers on my graph because we got to determine what should we put down, count by. So I know my y's are really counted by 5s. So we can count these all by 5. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, and this would be 40. And on the bottom here, I can count by 1s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And now let's plot our points. So we have 1 and 5. We have 3 and 15. We have 5 and 25. And we got 8 and 40. And you know that we only use quadrant 1 because you can't work a negative number of hours. And if you work 0 hours, you get 0 pay. Another application. The prom committee raises money for the prom by selling flowers. The money earned for the prom is dependent on the number of flowers sold. Money earned is represented by the equation y equals 3x minus 75. Find the amount of money raised when 25, 50, 75, and 100 flowers are sold. Make a graph to represent the equation. So we're going to do the same thing, just with different numbers and different equation. So if I put a 25 in for x, 25 times 3 is 75. 75 minus 75 is 0. Put a 50 in. 50 times 3 is 150. 150 minus 75 gives us 75. 3 times 75 equals 225. Minus 75 gives us 150. And 3 times 100 is 300. Minus 75 gives us 225. So now we need to graph these. You can see my y's. We can count by 25s. So if we count by 25s, this will be 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150, 175. We all have to go by more than 25s to be able to fit it on the graph. So let's count by 50s. So 50, 100, 150, 200, 250. And then on the bottom, we can count by 25s. So 25, 50, 75, 100. And now we can plot our points. So 0 and 25. So 0 and 25, that's halfway here. 50, or 25 and 0. So that means if you sell 25, you don't make any money because you had to pay $75 to purchase everything. 50, 75, so that would be in the middle of 50 and 100. 75 and 150 be here, and 100 and 225 would be in the middle between 200 and 250. And there you have